Welcome to AM Best Audio.
Renewable energy assets built and managed with smart engineering, proactive protocols, and strategic risk management are far more likely to withstand extreme weather, a finding with direct implications for insurers, according to kWh Analytics' inaugural Resilient Power Report. As renewable capacity is projected to double by 2030, and 54% of developers cite weather damage as their top operational concern, insurers face both rising exposure to climate related risks and opportunities to underwrite, price, and manage policies that differentiate resilient assets from vulnerable ones. I'm Lori Chortis for AM Best Audio, and joining us now to discuss that and other key findings from the report is kWh Analytics CEO Jason Kaminsky. Jason, welcome. So great to speak with you again. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Likewise, Lori, thank you again for having us and looking forward to the conversation.
As am I. Jason, what inspired you to develop the Resilient Power Report?
Yeah, kWh, as an MGA in the renewable energy sector, we've produced an annual report called the Solar Risk Assessment. So earlier this year, we released our seventh Solar Risk Assessment, which is a data driven look at the risks facing the solar and storage industry and a little bit of wind as well, with a focus on the US, but really some international coverage as well. And what we found is that there's a lot of good news stories that just don't get told, right? It doesn't make the news when an event happens and nothing breaks and everyone rides through the event without issue. But in many ways, there's equally as much learning, if not more learning, from those non-events as there is in examining what happens when a system goes bad. And we thought it was important, especially in today's environment, to really highlight and underscore those stories. And that ended up turning into what is quickly becoming a complement to the solar risk assessment, which is the Resilient Power Report. And it's a few case studies on systems where, frankly, they didn't make the news because nothing happened. And we like that. So we wanted to promote best practices and help educate the industry.
Jason, what are the key resilience lessons from the report, and how might they influence how insurers evaluate risk?
Yeah, so we bucket them into really two broad categories. One is, I'll call them design or equipment decisions. These are things that you make once at the start of a project and are very hard to change. And then there's a whole bucket of operational decisions that you make really on an ongoing and continuous basis. And the report covers some examples from both of those. So take a design decision. One of the case studies in the report looked at a hurricane event and a whole bunch of locations that were affected. And they found that they looked at a few rooftop systems, and there were some where the systems were designed with a setback from the edge of the roof, and those fared much better than those that went right up to the edge of the roof. So, really, I'd say maybe in hindsight, kind of an obvious comment, which is don't build where you're going to get a bunch of updrafts, but really, really valuable to see it in the data and a simple best practice to adopt for those out there designing systems. A similar, I'd say, decision or factor that went into this was an island system that had seen a lot of low grade fatigue over time, and it led to a failure of washers. So what they do, they actually designed a new washer for a much more, call it, exposed environment that ends up being a much better design decision for that kind of asset in the future. Operationally, maybe I'll give one example in the interest of time. You can download the report and read all of these. But we had a client, a kWh client, um, a utility in Arkansas, and they had only a small exposure of solar facilities, and they were exposed to hail. Not the most severe damaging hail, but still had hail exposure. And there's been some recent technology innovations for hail mitigation, one of which is what you call auto stow. So if you basically have the system, it'll ping weather data all the time. And if there's a hail event approaching, you can actually physically move the modules out of the way of the hail. And we designed a policy structure whereby if the client had upgraded their system, they got better deductible cover from us. It ended up being very valuable during this year's storm season. So, really proud of what we've been able to do on that front, but really, call it the upfront design decisions and then these operational decisions that they're making every day.
What are the most common operational challenges that renewable energy developers now face, and how can insurers help encourage resilience?
Yeah, I'm heartened to see that, the hardest decision that you can change is the physical location of the asset. So I'm heartened to see that independent power producers or the owners of these facilities and developers of these facilities are beginning to underwrite to that in their decision making. So that's really, really nice to see. Of course, there's a lot of content out there. It's in our solar risk assessment as well as this report on module selection, the thickness of the glass, the quality of the racking. So we're seeing that decision making beginning to go earlier in the process. Operationally, I touched on hail stow. Those are becoming very important. We're seeing a lot of innovation in that segment as far as the steepness of the stow, the communication on site to make sure that there's resilience if the grid goes down. I mentioned auto stow. That's a really, really important innovation. So there's a lot, I'd call it in the hail front. For things like fires, talk vegetation management, the way that people are designing battery storage facilities. We're seeing a lot of challenges. I say a lot of innovation, and one of the more recent elements is call it validation. So actually, the fourth case study in here is from an independent engineering firm that went out is beginning to validate that these protocols work before the storms arrive, so that when the event happens, we know that it's going to go into a protective position. Um, insurers, I'd say, are still not quite at the cutting edge. We try to be here at kWh, but we are beginning to see early indications of changes in price, deductible sublimits for those systems that are much more hardened. So I think it's heartening. We'll see a lot more of that over the coming years.
Customize your data experience. BestLink now offers an interactive company dashboard that provides company-level intelligence in a fast, user-friendly interface featuring interactive tables, charts, and Sparkline performance histories. Customize the dashboard tiles to prioritize the insurer ratings, data, and analytics that best support your workflow. AM Best. Our insight, your advantage.
Jason, what role does collaborative risk management play?
There's so many stakeholders in these assets. There's not only the asset owners and the manufacturers, and of course the brokers and insurers. There's also third-party O&M companies. There's financiers. There's federal labs. It needs to be collaborative by its nature because no single player has the right answer or, frankly, the influence to change decision making on the ground. So that's where reports like this come in, sharing best practices, sharing data and insights from many different perspectives is critical in order to really get the best outcome. And we're learning every year, probably learning every season, depending on the peril. And taking those lessons and pushing them back out to industry is inherently a collaborative risk management process.
Jason, how do extreme weather events and climate related risks impact insurance coverage, pricing, and policy structure?
This is the question we get the most from our clients, which is if I make X decision, will it show up in my insurance policy? And today the answer is sometimes. Sometimes you'll see it in one of the three factors, right, that we just talked about. And we are really making an effort to give feedback to our clients, give feedback to the brokers about what the decisions are, whether it's, hey, I'm buying this portfolio and it has these three assets in it, and like, are these hotspots for a pricing? Am I going to get hit with a big cat exposure as a result of this? And developing tools, I'd say, to help inform the community about what inherently leads to different variations in insurance pricing and structure and what decisions they can make in order to help mitigate those risks. And again, I'd say the understanding and mutual acceptance is getting better, probably still in the first couple innings of us getting mature as an industry, but we're getting a lot better, I'd say, as a segment, which is really heartening to see.
Jason, how can insurers differentiate between resilient and vulnerable assets?
Yeah, that's a the $1,000,000 question, right? Because insurers can only make really good distinctions when we're getting really good data. And that nature of that data is changing over time. And we're finding new ways, I'd say, to get access to the relevant data that's important to the underwriting. So whether that's coming from a client to say, here's, I'm writing up a memo about my hail stow practices. I'm sharing with you a contract that shows that someone else is doing it for us, or connecting us to one of their vendors that says, we have, think of like an IoT device, right? We have signals every 5 minutes of what this technology is doing. And we can overlay that against events and really just verify that they are doing what they tell us that they are doing. Um, so we are a data company. I would be remiss if I didn't say data helps in understanding and scoping these risks. And, there's a lot of nuance, I'd say, because you can have, as indicated in the report, two projects that to a layman look the same next to each other and go through the same event, and one will have a big loss and the other one won't. And I think that's where both the science and the art of underwriting come into play.
And looking ahead, Jason, what emerging trends should insurers prepare for?
Well, the power segment is growing quickly. In my tenure in the industry, I'd say this is maybe the most activity I've ever seen. So if I set aside maybe the resilience lens for a moment, we're still going to see incredibly rapid growth of renewable energy on the grid to support all of our power infrastructure, much of it data centers and AI linked. It will affect, to that point, the types of exposures I think we're seeing. Like if your solar project is powering a data center, I think we're going to start seeing changes in what business income looks like and needs to underwrite maybe, adjacent or linked other types of power infrastructure to help support the data center. I think we're also going to see probably even faster growth in the battery storage segment, some of it data center related, some of it just policy driven. So the nature of the risks will continue to evolve. The nature of, I'd call it, our energy infrastructure will continue to evolve, but it's certainly an interesting segment at the moment.
Absolutely. Well, Jason, this has been so interesting, so insightful. It's always such a pleasure to speak with you. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Lori. Appreciate it as always.
That was Jason Kaminsky, CEO of kWh Analytics. For AM Best Audio, I'm Lori Chortis.
Looking to get the full attention of the insurance industry? We have the platforms that will do just that. Whether it be AM Best TV, AM Best Audio, Best Review Magazine, or Best Day. Find out more by calling AM Best Advertising Sales at 908-439-2200, extension 5399, and have a great day.